Hello, everyone. This is Jimmy Beach with Exposure Software. Welcome to this Exposure Beginner's Guide, or step-by-step process into exposure. We're going to go over the whole workflow today from beginning to end. In the next few minutes, we'll be going through the basics of using exposure, and we'll touch on all the major points in post-processing using it. Exposure is our advanced non-destructive raw photo organizer and editor. It handles a full post-processing workflow. You can use it to copy images from camera cards, then apply editing adjustments, creative effects, export your finished photos, and you can even print directly from within Exposure. A quick history lesson about Exposure very quickly is about 15 years ago, Exposure was developed for film photographers. The transition from developing analog film in the darkroom with chemistry, to processing digital images in the computer was difficult. It was difficult to wrap your head around that big major change in the workflow. So Exposure's accurate film emulation presets really are what gave photographers that feel of and look of film that they were used to getting in the darkroom. So that essentially gave them their much loved films back. And that's really what began Exposure. And so as we, and then, as the years went by, we added plenty of new, processing, controls, and we're going to go over all of that stuff today. So as we get into the demonstration, I want to point out that there will be time at the end reserved for answering any questions. So you go ahead and type them in now. And if I don't get to them when I'm going through the demonstration, I will make sure to at the end. And so let's begin, and we can take a look at how Exposure makes photo organizing hassle-free. So I'm going to click Copy from card. Now, when you insert a camera card into the computer, typically Exposure will recognize that card and will open up this dialog on its own. This is the copy from card dialog. So inside of Exposure, I'll hit Tab, and then you can see all the other windows and stuff come up. If you want to turn that functionality off, you can actually do that right here in the preferences. And you can see that, where is it? When camera card is inserted, right here on the bottom, launch copy photos from card dialog. So I have it checked so that when I insert a camera card, then Exposure will automatically open that dialog for me. But some people don't like that to happen because they put camera cards or whatever in all the time, and then it pops up with that window now and again. So just wanted to let you know that that's a possibility to change that. So I'm going to click Copy Photos from Card. Then I'm going to move the chat window over to the other window. Sorry about that. Okay, so here we are on the Copy from Card dialog. We can see that Exposure automatically selected. Here's a camera card right here, and it went down to images on that card. So, excuse me, these are some. Oh, aren't they cute? Let's go to this camera card. I have another one plugged in as well. I did want to show this because I can select both of these camera cards to copy images from at the same time if I wanted to. I'm just going to use this one camera card for now. So in this copy from card dialog, there are three major steps in the workflow. Step one is where you select the source. It's over here on the left-hand side. And then step two is where you review images here in the center. And step three, where you can see the number on top, you can select the destination and options. So what I'm going to do, I have my camera card selected. That's step one. I'm going to go through here and review all these and just say I'm going to select them all. And then on the right side, I'm going to tell it where to save those pictures. So on the destination, it's right here. I want to choose the desktop. Now, actually, I'm not. I'm going to do other folder on my desktop. I'm going to put it inside the photos folder, just with all these ones. Keep it organized. So there, desktop photos folder, and I want to make John Barclay. So this is going to generate a John Barclay folder. That's who took all these photos right here. And it's going to put it into that photos folder on my desktop. Easy enough. We can also select to change the file names as we copy them to the camera card. Or we can add metadata, so copyright and all that kind of stuff here. We can also put it in collections or add keywords, or we even assign presets from exposure onto these images as they're being copied to the computer. Now, you can just see here as an example of a file naming template that I kind of use for my own stuff. And that is, you can see that essentially I have it broken down into 3 steps. That is what it is. That is, or this example here was Scott and Henner. And then it was a wedding, and this was the card, the first card, see card 1. And then you can see that I just used the number sequence as to how many images came on that card. So that's how I use my naming convention. But you can save your own here inside of this and use it again and again. So anyway, I'm not going to rename these files. I'll just leave them as is. So I will start the process. Now, once I start this process, I can immediately begin working on the photos or the files. So it kicks me up to the photos folder, and then I'll go to John Barclay, and now it's done copying all those folders or all those images already. But I wanted to show you that during that copy process, like if I would have highlighted the 1100 or whatever photos on that other card, I would have had some more time to go in here and I could have started doing my processing. There was only 31 images on that card, so that came in really quick. So anyway, so there are no modules in Exposure. So all the commands that you see on the screen are available all the time. You don't have to switch between modules to do different things. Also, Exposure Exposure has a catalog-free workflow. So your edits are actually stored. Here's our folder here. And then my here's a Finder window. And we can see on the desktop in the Photos folder, I have all these different folders of images. And if I scroll over into that folder of images, we can see the sidecar files live in this folder right here. So it's just right within that folder of images is where it gets put. So that makes things a lot quicker and easier to process. It's also, there's no single point of failure using this technique or using this system. So if something should go wrong, then it's, you have less likelihood that something should go wrong, and it's a little more efficient, so the performance is a little quicker. Okay, let's keep moving along. I'm just visiting my notes. I didn't forget what I'm doing. Just making sure that I point out all the good stuff. All right, so the folder structure inside of Exposure is really simple. That's one of the greatest things about it. The folder structure is exactly the same as you see on your hard drive, so there's no new learning curve when you come into this program. You don't have to relearn where you hid or where you put everything. So you can, I just showed you the Finder window on my desktop, and it's the exact same folder data here. So desktop, my photos folder, these are the folders of images that I had. Okay. And so this is really quick because I can just go and jump to another folder and do some editing and then jump back and do editing or organizing or whatever. So let's talk about organizing these files really quick. Or wait, before I do that, I do want to show that there are collections. Collections are down here. Collections are a great way of grouping together images from various locations on your computer without making duplicates. So you can make as many collections as you want. You can also make collections within collections to build a hierarchy. You can see them here as family photos, right? Mr. Mustache. That should be both of these guys by now. They're old. But anyway, so collections are there. What else? Yeah, you can also, sub-collections. You can make as many sub-collections within a collection to establish an easy-to-follow hierarchy like that to get through collections if you use them quite often. And we have videos about creating and managing collections in specific, just about that on our website. So if you have some information or if you have some more questions about collections, go over there and help that. Oh, also, I want to point out right now that if you are looking for help inside of Exposure, there is a menu at the top with a link to the keyboard shortcuts. So you can go there and you can see all of the keyboard shortcuts. Also, you can look at the manual. And inside the manual, there are a whole lot of options there to for really everything inside of exposure. It's all documented inside of there. There's even links to videos in there and all that good stuff. So use both of those resources. They're really, really easy. All right, so now let's talk about culling images. So we have 3 different things to apply to our images to use for culling, and that's flags, stars, and color labels. So the flags, you can see them down here on the bottom in the filter menu. Let me hide these panels. We don't need them. Okay, we can see this is our filter menu down at the bottom, but it shows you what options we have to apply to these images. So we have flags here. We have pick flag, reject flag, and no flag. And then you have star labels 1 through 5 and color labels. There's 6 of them. Actually, there's only 5, but then there's no color label, which is that one. So 6. And then we can also use keywords for filtering. We can also filter by metadata. So if we wanted to only look at a certain type of image, like just, well, is there only RAF images in here? That might have not been a good example. Oh yeah, well there, that's a CR2. We can also type in like 70 millimeter, none of them are shot with a 70 millimeter. How about 200 millimeter? There we go. So we can do it like that. Okay, so now let's apply some of these things to our images. So you can see these ones have flags on them already. So we can just click on that flag. That's a reject flag now. It's black. Or a neutral means no flag. We can apply it with the keyboard shortcuts on the keyboard. Minus removes, plus sets it to a pick flag. Plus, again, neutralizes the flag. Minus sets it to reject. Minus, again, removes that. Okay, so if I wanted to, I can use my keyboard shortcuts like the arrow keys on the keyboard and the plus and minus button on my keyboard as well, and run through here very quickly and see which of these images I want to say that I want to keep and which ones I don't. Let's say in this selection. Okay. Also, I can do the same thing with the numbers 1 through 5 if I wanted to give star ratings to the images, right? So I can go through them like this. And you can see that's pretty quick when we're trying to identify things and organizing our images. Also, we can if we hold down the Shift modifier button and hit plus, let's say, it will assign the pick flag and it will advance to the next image automatically. See how it comes along there? So if we do that, we can do the same thing if we wanted to apply our star ratings here. So if I just hold down Shift, I can put star ratings on the images. Or if I want to hold down Shift, I can apply color labels to the images with the same process. So if using these keyboard shortcuts, the reason I'm showing you this is that using the keyboard shortcuts, we can really quickly get through applying some different criteria to call these images down to our top selects. And that way we're not going to edit all of the photos, let's say, on our camera card. We're only going to edit the ones that we're only going to spend the time investing into editing on the ones that we know we want or that we're going to keep. So that's a really quick way of doing that. So now that we have some of those things applied to these images in this folder, I can use the filters at the bottom to pick out the best ones. So these are the ones that I've picked as pick flags, or I can use these are the ones that have blue color labels or yellow. See? So it's really quick and easy to go through and organize my images like that. So now we've gone through and we've called this shoot down to just some top numbers, right? And that's the idea that we have. So I'm going to jump now over to another folder of images from Michael Gilman. Here we go. And we can see there's a ton of them in here. But I've already gone through here and I'm going to use one of my labels at the bottom, red. So I applied red color labels to some of these that I thought were extra pretty. And I was going to do the demo on these today because I think that these are going to show off how to apply some of our processing and exposure very well. Okay, so we're going to talk about processing photos now. So I'm going to open up this panel on the right, or dock on the right side. And let's get going, actually. Okay, so raw processing, or when you think about processing images, there are two things that you essentially do with the adjustments that you make. And that is, you can make adjustments to correct an issue in the photo, like if it's too soft or if it, is off and it's not quite straight, or then you do other things that are more creative. So you do adjustments that are to correct issues and you do adjustments that are creative. Okay. So correcting issues, fixing problems, is typically the first thing that you want to address when you are editing photos. So let me zoom in on this picture. So when we see an image like this and we think correcting issues, the first things that I think of is lens correction. So this is pretty darn nice and straight, but lens correction is one of those first stage things in my workflow. And this would be a good suggestion for anybody starting out. So we apply lens correction and exposure. It's automatically done via a profile. We can see that it's already came in here under the lens profile. So if you don't have a lens that is supported, then this profile will not load. But if you know it's a certain make and manufacturer, you can usually go to one that's really close to it, and that works. However, if you don't want to use that, you can do everything manually. You don't have to do the automatic lens correction. You can set up your own manual. Here's for distortion. And you can use all of that. You can use same thing for vignette correction, or you can use the profile. So you can set it all that way. So after applying lens correction, which is already applied to this image, close that one. Another thing that we would want to do after lens correction would be sharpening and noise reduction, okay? Also, while we're down here, I'm going to say transform tools because they're right here. So the transform tools, and that's to correct any perspective, skew, anything like that in the image. You can also turn on the grid lines here, which are really helpful if you're actually trying to eyeball this. See here, this one? The top of this roof line is pretty close to being straight, but not quite. So we'll fix that. Okay. I'm going to fix that here with the crop tool because it's way easier. So I'm just going to use this is the auto rotation tool, and I'm just going to draw a line here across this top. It's going to be really close there. Okay, there we go. I'll close the crop tool. So now we have that nice and straight. Okay. So now, let's talk about sharpening. Sharpening is another basic step in the workflow. This is one of the first things that I do. Sharpening is really quick and easy to do. You need to remember the keyboard button Alt or Option. So if you hold down the Alt or Option button when you're applying sharpening, it changes the view to update to give you a little bit more information about what's happening. So this is showing you just a black and white view of the image. So you can see, like, if you look down here in the foreground, you can see if I turn it really harsh and strong, you can see the effects down there really, really easy in black and white. All right. Anyway, so hold down the Alt button. We'll hit radius. You can also see here, we're just selecting the size of the effect, of the sharpening effect. And then masking tells us which ones of the edges or how much contrast there needs to be in the edge in order to get sharpening effect applied to it. And so here we go. So now we have our sharpening applied. Noise reduction, same kind of thing. Now it says that the profile mode is not available, and that's because this is not a raw image. If it was a raw image, then there would be a profile here for noise reduction. Michael shoots in JPEG mode 90% of the time, so we're editing JPEGs. Let's see here. So whenever you're doing something like noise reduction, especially for me, I have to zoom in. So we zoom in real tight, and then we can see where some of that noise would be appearing. See, and we can actually see that the sharpening that we applied on here has made it look like it's fuzzy. So that's really strong. So also noise reduction, we want to turn that brightness up there. So there we go. Oh yeah, much better. Okay, cool. So now that we've applied noise reduction, we've done all of our tweaking to make this image. We fixed the issues for what we were talking about in this image. So now we're going to move on to some of the creative edits to make this into our photo instead of just a picture. So let's look at the presets panel. I'm going to open the dock here on the left, and then I'll move the splitter right here up, and we can open the presets panel. Now, in the presets panel, there are a ton of presets in Exposure. Exposure's rendering engine was built to accurately emulate film. So even down to subtleties of individual film grain clusters. The presets in Exposure simulate a very wide variety of iconic film looks. So, and you can use these presets unmodified. You just hover over them to apply them to your image. Or you can stack them and use them to blend and make a new creative look. So these are all the color options. We can also go to the black and white. And they're all organized into categories so you can go directly to what kind of looks you're looking for. So if I wanted to do just a standard black and white film, I can go to something like this. And of course, choose my very favorite, Tri-X 400. And I can select this by left clicking and it will apply it right there on this layer that we have here in the layers panel. However, we did some adjustments. Remember, you can see here on the sharpening panel, it has the little reset wheel there. It's telling me that there's been adjustments made on that layer. So if we look at that at a glance, we see we have some corrections. So I'll just grab a hold of one of these presets and just drag it up here on new layer. And then it puts this separately, right? So I can make other adjustments here down below. Now, the layers panel adds a little bit of complexity, and it also adds a whole lot of power to when you're editing your images, and we're going to talk about that more in detail. I just wanted to show you that we could take, let's say, another look here and put it over the top, and then maybe even blend those together somehow. And you can kind of see what I'm working on there, right? Give it a little more crunchy look. So I'm gonna get rid of these guys. Delete layer. That was just an example, but I did want to show you that there's a whole lot of options here that you have inside the presets panel. So normally, if I'm doing something like a portrait, here we'll check on a portrait. I like to use the presets in the print low contrast category. The low contrast it's a little bit nicer to skin, and portrait like this Kodak Portrait NC actually adds a brightening effect to the skin, so it can make that images of skin look bright and healthy. You don't have to do anything to it. You just apply that preset and it just brightens that skin up. It's a really, really easy and quick way of making your portraits awesome. Okay, so now that we've gone over some of our presets, then we're going to talk about how we can go through and make some editing in some of our editing panels over here on the right-hand side. All right, so switch to another image. I'm going to close this dock on the left because we don't need it. And okay, so here's an image right here, and we're going to begin editing, let's say, okay? So the first thing that I'm going to point out is that you don't need to just adjust one picture or one photo at a time in Exposure. You can select a bunch of them. So I'm going to select a bunch of them, and I'm going to point out that I'm just going to apply auto, which is right here at the top of the basic panel. This is usually where you begin making adjustments to your photos. These are creative edits that we're making now. So I've selected all of these images. I'm just going to hit auto, and that will intelligently apply adjustments that I have set onto these images here. If you push or open the drop down, you can see how I've had all of these set. That's how I like mine. And usually once you have that set up for your own looks, to applying a look that you like, you don't really have to mess with it again. So I'm going to hit deselect. I do want to point out that if we look at, let's say, the exposure value on this image, it's 0.6 to 5. Go to the next image, it's 137. So although I did apply auto adjustments to all of these images, Exposure intelligently looked at the image, read the image, and applied the appropriate amount of those adjustments to the image. So let's open this one, and we can see that if I hold down the \, we can see a before and after. So I'll do that now and again just to show you the before and after, the effects that I'm making some changes through. Okay, so we did automatic adjustments, and you can see that it went through here and it made adjustments to exposure, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, dynamic contrast, and haze. So since there's already been adjustments there, I'm going to leave these be. However, I'm going to point out that when we make adjustments on any panel in exposure, typically start at the very top of the panel and then just work your way down through the settings. The reason we say that is because, like, an adjustment to exposure, for example, will impact the saturation in the image, right? So if the exposure is, if we're overexposed, we're going to have less saturation, right? Whereas if we're underexposed, typically we'll have more block up of colors and stuff like that happening in the dark areas. Just as, typically. All right, so anyway, so as we make adjustments, that's why we start at the top and we work our way down. We make adjustments to the large areas of the image, and then we kind of refine that look as we work our way down. Okay, so let's take a look at the color panel next. The color panel is another great place to make some fundamental adjustments and tweaks to the image. Okay, so at the top of the color panel, you can do something really quick and easy with your color filter. That's just add a little bit of a warm touch or a coolness or something like that. You can add a little bit of a warm touch, and then you can make it more dense if it's not enough of a warm touch, like you want it to look like golden hour or something like this. That's pretty easy to do. Let's look at another image here. Okay. Ooh, that one's cool. And then down on the bottom here, we have our HSL sliders, hue, saturation, and luminance controls. So we have there's a lot of individual controls that you have here to make adjustments to the different colors in the image. But you don't have to be a color mastermind and know which image is which over here. So if I wanted to make change the hue of the reds or whatever, you can use the hue color or hue picker. What is this? And you just select this, the two arrows with a little line in the middle of it. Select that, and then you can select a color in the image to make adjustments to. For example, if I wanted to change this green tone to make it more blue, I can drag it up and make it more blue. Or if I wanted to make it more, yellow, I can drag it down and make it more yellow. Or I can hit undo because that didn't really do anything nice to this image. Let's try using the saturation for, here we go. We'll do the same thing though. I can grab a hold of the color picker and then grab a hold of a tone where I want to add a little bit more saturation to that area of the image. Oh yeah, that looks good. So you can see that it's there. It's more yellows and greens. So we can add some saturation to the yellows and greens. That looks nice right in that zone in the middle. Another thing we can do with saturation is control the saturation in like just the shadows or midtones or highlights. And sometimes like this, where we have a darker area in the foreground, right? We can lower the saturation of the coloring in the shadows. I'll do it a lot so you can see what I'm talking about. But what it does is create sort of a color vignette almost, so that the color is strongest in the center of the image, but then the outside it's faded a little bit. Anyway, or we can just punch the center ones up or the midtones up. This image is actually really good for this demo. Okay, so also if we wanted to use the luminance, that's the brightness of the colors, we can do the same thing with them down here. So we can just drag that across to brighten up a certain tone value or color values in the image. So yeah, so lots and lots of options there in the color panel. Another color and tone panel right here is the tone curve. Tone curve is very similar to, well, the curve editor. If you've used curve editor before in other software, Photoshop, Lightroom, this is just like the curve editor. So if you know your way around curves and you like to use curves in your images, then you can use them. However, if you don't know how to use curves all that well, you can really mess your image up like this, but it's really easy because you can just reset those. However, there are a bunch of presets, so you don't really need to know your way around how the curves work up here at the top. Anytime in exposure that you see one of these drop down panels here, there are presets. So these presets only apply a curve here in the tone curve panel. So we can do a bunch of different stuff. You can see here this crush blacks. That's essentially making all of the black values very, very dark. This is harsh landscapes. That's a really, really extreme amount of contrast. Here's another one. Milky blacks. This is actually kind of a cool faded look, and all it does is just pull. You can see how simple it is. It just pulls that blackest black value just up a little bit and gives you a little bit of some. This is just a tiny bit down on the. Instead of raising it, it lowers just those values just a touch. That's really simple. So we'll leave that. It looks good. Okay, so let's talk about other creative effects now. So we have a spot heal tool inside of exposure. I'm trying to find something here. I think we have some. Now, I know this really might sound like overkill, but these little things, this is actually a very, very good thing to point out. So the spot heal tool is right here. The spot heal tool is a great way to get rid of little distractions in the image. I'm going to get rid of most of these, so I'll turn it to about 80, 85. Little things like this, just to let you know. Little tiny things that are either dark or light that are right near the edges of your frame can be distracting. Can be very distracting to the eye, especially if they're really dark like that one was. So I would go along here, and all I'm doing is just using the space bar now. You can see that my turns the cursor into a hand if I hold that. So yeah, I would take out a couple of these, and it's pretty easy. If you can see this one, the sample went out in the water, so I'll just bring that back down so that it's from the sand. Now, the spot heal tool has two modes, and that's heal and then clone. You can see this out here looks like a sensor spot. So that one I'm going to have to mess with a little bit. Okay. Nope. All right. So anyway, it's pretty quick and easy to use. If you turn it to clone mode down here, clone mode is better if you're working with some hard texture or if you have a hard edge that you're working next to where you're trying to completely cover up what's underneath it rather than blend it with what's around it. So if I turn that to 100%, it essentially is just copying the information from this spot over onto that area that I just designated. Okay, cool. So yeah, I know that really seemed like a lot of work for that little bit, but if we hold down the backslash key and we look at the before, and you can see the stuff that's on that beach, and then you do after, and you don't see the stuff that's on that beach, you look right into that horizon, and you're drawn right into that shot. So anyway, let's do another thing here. We'll add a vignette. Vignettes are great options in exposure. That's a great way to draw attention to the subject. Inside of exposure, we actually have a lot of preset vignettes, and there's a really easy way that you can, or there's a way here that you can make vignettes that are very organic in look and feel. So if I turn my softness down, you can see how the vignette has that organic shape, and that is from the distortion and lump size values in exposure. So we can change that so that we can have it look organic in the way that we would want to. You can hit random seed to change how that is applied to your making that organic shape. And then we'll make it more soft again. And there we go. So now I'll just turn it down. Very nice. So that's how we can do organic looking vignettes really easily inside of exposure. Let's find a good photo for this. The next thing I want to show you is bokeh. And I'm going to actually laugh about this because I said bokeh for the longest time. And it's not bokeh, it's bokeh. Anyway, now you know. So inside the bokeh folder, this is another great way to draw attention to the subject. Bokeh adds creative blurring, but it, like everything in exposure, it is kicked up a few notches. So we can control where we want our blurring to be applied with focus regions. You can see how it is reacting as I move this around the image. So let's delete that one and we'll move one of these ones. So this is actually a good way to make something look like tilt shift. So hopefully it'll work. That'd be cool. This is a, what is it? Planar, full planar. Anyway, this creative blurring is really strong, but if I turned it down and made it more subtle, things like this can really add the effect of drawing you into that shot, you know, just to add this little bit of blurring out here and over here on the left. Things like that. Oh, yeah. Even on portraits, too. I use the radial bokeh. See, there I go. All the time. All right. So grain. Let's talk about grain real quick. Grain and exposure is second to none. You have more controls than anywhere else, and there are tons of presets of it, obviously. So this grain actually came from when we were doing development on exposure, the film presets in exposure. So here you can see this grain appearing here. So I just chose a preset there, this regular grain preset. We can change how much or control how much the strength is. We can also say where we want it to appear in the image. And I think that's really where that sets this apart. So I'm going to make it so that I don't see very many in the midtones, but I do want to see them in the highlights because there's this glowy action happening here. And then I can bring it so that if I see them in the shadows as well. So in here, I'll see some grain, and here I'll see grain, and out here I won't. There we go. So you can also change how rough it looks, if there's more color variation inside the grain, and there's even presets for the size of the grain clusters themselves. All right, so let's take a look at overlays. Overlays are a great way to punch up an image if it needs it. If you're making some, let's see if we have an old-fashioned look image. Actually, this might work. So I was going to put a border on and make something look old, you know, like an old plate photo, but I think a light effect might look even cooler. So let's see if we can pick one of those out. We'll go to the haze. And then I already have, usually the way that I do things is I don't try to introduce any new colors into an image by adding one of these overlays. So this one's sunrise. We're looking at a sunset. That could work. So I'll make it as opaque as I can so we can see it. Now you just move this around the image and you can set it however you'd like. And then we can mess with it. You know, we can flip it or rotate it or make it bigger. I think I will. Yeah. And then after, you know, we can even set it to a different blend mode. After we do that, then, oh yeah, well, I'm going to rotate it a little bit. Okay. After we do that, then we can just take the opacity here and like bring it down to blend it in a little bit more. And little subtle things like that really can make an image look great. So now we have a little bit of an overlay that we added just to give this some spice. Not like it needed it, but it looks great. So now that we've made some adjustments and we've went through a bunch of these different options that we have, but we did not talk about layers. And layers are really important inside of exposure. So crash course in layers in like 2 minutes, and then we'll get back on it and wrap things up. Okay, so let's go back to this image. So I've applied some adjustments already. You can see I have the overlay here where it's designated by having this icon showing me that I've applied some adjustments here on this overlays thing. I don't think I hit auto on this image yet, so I will do that too. So now I have adjustments on the basic panel made, and I have adjustments on the overlays panel made. Okay, so let's say that I want to add a preset because it's an easy way of, you know, if I add a preset and that preset has an overlay in it or has basic adjustments made in it, it's going to overwrite these two adjustments that I made to this image. So a great way to separate those two things would be to add a preset in its own layer, and then we can adjust those edits that we made here separate from what makes this preset. So I'll grab a hold of a preset here. Oh, I went to the wrong ones. I'll grab a hold of a preset here. Slide films. Slide films are usually way more saturated and they work better for landscapes than they do portraits, just because they can tend to make skin look, well, sick. Or like a Oompa Loompa. I mean, if it was a clown. So anyway, I applied Fuji Velvia. You can see here, I just clicked it here on the presets panel and drug it over here and over onto the add layer button, and it just applied it in its own layer. So now I can adjust the opacity of that effect so that it's not as strong. I'm going to close this panel now. Notice that when I adjusted the opacity, that this layer thumbnail updated as well. So if I raised it to 100%, it's white. If I turn it to 0%, it's black. And somewhere in the middle is somewhere in the middle. Okay, so this is showing you visually how much of the effects on this layer are being applied to this image. And right now, about half. So you see 50% gray or so. Okay, so if we wanted to add another effect to this layer, and we can then independently control it, we can do that by adding more and more layers. So what we can do is, I'm just going to add a layer here. Now let's talk about masking. Masking allows us to, or enables us to apply adjustments to local areas of the image, just smaller areas, not to the whole photo all at the same time. So we'll use our masking. I clicked on the brush tool. It opened up. You can see it selected the layer mask in layer 3. And I'll select from one of the presets here. Let's look at yeah. Actually, let's go to lighten, okay? So dodge. So what I'm going to do is hit a little bit of this edge here just because it's a little bit dark, okay? And I can set my brush parameters here, and then I just apply. And you can see how it applies onto there, my dodge. Looks perfect. You can't even see it. Okay, obviously that doesn't blend well at all with the image, so now I can just take the opacity slider and lower that until it does blend in with that image a little bit better. But I still have that effect in giving myself a little bit more, or brightening that up a little bit more. Now, obviously, I did a really bad job on the mask there, so don't judge me about how bad that mask was. I can fix it. If I hold down Alt, it goes to the eraser tool. You can see it there. And also notice that the flow level's low. So if I just want to fade off a little bit of that edge, then I can with a couple of brush strokes. And now it blends in really nicely. Okay, so now we've applied with a brush. We've applied some effect onto this image with a brush now. But we can do a heck of a lot more with these different layers and layer options that we have. Okay, so I used a brush for that one. So let's try something else. This time, instead of making or using a preset, I am going to just go to the color panel and I will make it really warm. Really super warm. Okay. So now I'm going to go to our layer mask here. Now, when you hover on the layer mask, don't be alarmed. You aren't having an aneurysm right now. This red is just showing you where the mask boundaries are. So if I move down and hover over the one below it, you will see the red highlight where we had the mask there. So where it's red, that's where that effect is being applied on the image. This one, it's all red, so it's being applied everywhere. So that's that weird coloring that we did. I'm going to use a gradient. Remember how we used the gradients in the bokeh panel? So I'm going to use a gradient, and that gradient, we can see it apply right here in the layer panel. So I'm going to turn that around. And actually, what do I want to do? I'll put this up on the top. So I'm going to move this way up here on the top of the image. And this is our feathering edge. And I'll move that down. So what I'm doing here is I'm applying. So you can see like at the top, that's where our 100% of that our overlay coloring is being applied. And then at the bottom, none of it's being applied. And I like the mask. I like where we're going, but I don't think that the color is going to work. So I'm going to need to update that. So I'll click out. So we've been adjusting the masks now, but now we can go back and we can adjust the adjustments that we made that mask from, or for that effect from. So what if I choose one of the presets here? No, it looks like aliens, green. Yeah, we'll make it blue. That's pretty. There we go. So we really punched the blue up in that sky. And we used a gradient to do it. Okay. So now there's one more thing that we have in terms of making selections inside of exposure, and that is with the color constraint. So I'm going to look at this photo real fast. I'm going to hit, we already put a preset on this layer. We have our layer right here, our portrait preset. So I'm going to hit add layer, and then I want to apply, well, okay, great. Perfect skin and everything too. Let's say that she, for example's sake, let's say that this young lady here needed some skin smoothing. This is a really quick and easy way of showing how this works. I want to select the layer mask, and then I will select soften skin. Okay. So now this is a preset, right, that will apply a softened skin effect. Our layer mask is black. And then I want to go down to the color constraints on the bottom. I can select different hue preset ranges, or I can select an actual color in the image to create the mask. Now, you can see that the effect's way too strong, so don't judge me yet. Hold down the show mask, and you can see that was the automatic selection made from the color. So now, with the HSL sliders, that's hue, saturation, and luminance, we can reduce where that effect is being applied in the image by manipulating these sliders. And so we shall. So we don't want to have all the darkest stuff selected in the image, so we want to get rid of those ranges. Okay, so now we have a pretty good selection made, but if we only want it on her face, well, there's all that other stuff around her, right? So what we can do, I'm going to leave show mask on. What we can do now is just use our brush just the same, and we don't want it to apply all these other places. So I'll turn the flow on my eraser brush way up, and then I just simply paint on where I don't want it to apply in the image. And I've already used my color constraint controls to make a really fancy mask on her skin, and it took us all of no real time to do it. So now I'll turn off show mask, and we can see that the effect is only being applied to her face. And we can also, obviously we can turn that way down because she doesn't really need any of it at all. But now we at least see that we have a selection made that's very clean and crisp and clear within just a few moments of making that. So also we do have lots of videos about making different masks on our website. And well, we have actually, I think we have videos for every type of masking that you can do inside of exposure. So there's color constraints controls. There are a couple videos about that. There's videos about the gradient controls. There's videos about doing brushing, and there's videos about making presets. So, okay, so now that we've done all of this work to all of these images inside of exposure, we're just about done with our demo. So what we did was we did a bunch of edits. Well, if we want to go backwards and look at what we've done, we go to the history panel, and everything that we've done will be saved inside of this panel. So we can actually backtrack through our entire workflow till the very beginning where we imported the image and go back through it just like that. And if we want to make changes, we can select one of these and then go and make a change. Now, this information here inside of this history panel and all of the edits that we made to the image are saved inside of these sidecar files that we pointed out earlier in the demo. So inside of our folder of images, we have a folder, of exposure software folder. And for this version of exposure, we see these are the sidecar files. Inside of those files, that's where all of that information is saved. So if you want to collaborate with someone else, right? If you want to work with a outside retoucher, or editor, or something like that, or you want to synchronize edits across multiple computers in your shop, you can use a tool like Dropbox. And then as long as this main folder with your images in it is synced in that same Dropbox folder to both computers, then every computer will, all of the changes made to the images will be synced in exposure, right? So all the edits that I make here to these photos will be synced with that other computer as well. So that is just about it. We just have not exported our images, and that would be the last thing that we would do. So I can select more than one image because let's say we're going to actually export a lot of images. This is what you do when you're done editing. and I'll open up the export dialog. Now you might recognize this because it's very similar to the import dialog we used at the beginning of the demo. We can set where we want the files to be saved. There's the destination on the top. We can write out how we want the file naming sequence to be applied here. We can also tell it what type of file we want to save, a JPEG, what the quality is, what color space information. We can assign color metadata if we would like to, including any watermarks that we have made. And then we size the image to wherever we want it to be, or for whatever we're going to use it for here on the bottom. All right. So I have 19 images selected. It tells me right here. So if I were to export, I would export 19 photos. Pretty easy. But quick export, I will select it here, is much easier. Quick export understands that you're going to have to export for several different needs of any image that you use or anything that you do over and over. For example, sharing to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, or heck, why not sharing to all of those, including 500px? And you can do that all at the same time. So essentially what you're seeing here is this is we're going to save to the destination of the desktop in an export folder, and inside of that export folder will be a Facebook folder. The files will be named in a photo sequence. The file settings are that it's a high quality JPEG and sRGB, and that the image size is 2048. On Twitter, it's 1024, and for Instagram, it's 1080. So you can see that all of these different variants of these images are being applied as these will be saved. So if I hit export here, I will actually be exporting 76 images from the 19 that I have selected. And they'll all be saved with the appropriate names in the appropriate folders and with the appropriate settings applied. Okay, so that was our whole demo. That's going to conclude the demonstration. And so now we can turn our attention over to answering some questions. Before I do that, I do want to give a couple of comments quick, because I don't usually include the Q&A part in the recording. So if you want to get in contact with other Exposure users, you can do so in our Facebook group, the Exposure Facebook Users Group. Exposure Users Group on Facebook. Thank you. That's a great place to go and to see what other people are doing with the exposure and hear some tips and tricks and share some of your success stories that you've had using exposure. If you have any technical questions, the best place to take those is to our tech support or our support team, because like our support team sometimes need to know a little bit more about your computer than we want to share in an open forum. Everybody has a little bit of a different computer, and sometimes your computer needs specific instructions. Okay, so yes, also, if you like to post your work and share it with us, please do so. We love to see the work you guys create. So post your work to Instagram and use our hashtag #MyExposureEdit. Also, we wanted to thank you guys all for your interest in exposure.